Hey gang, it's James coming on for an impromptu live stream. I was actually just about to go to bed. I had actually just said goodnight to my wife. I was going to take the night off unless somebody just had anything pressing, like, hey James, what do you think about XYZ, you know? So I was just going to go to bed, and I just, the only way I can describe it is like a push, you know? I'm not going to come on and say, thus says Yahweh, or the Lord told me to do whatever, but I don't know. I feel like I need to talk about this right now. Maybe this will benefit somebody, so here goes. The real 10 Commandments, all right? I make a big deal about how, you know, for Protestants, really there's only 9. And for Catholics, there's really only 8, right? Because Protestants don't keep the Sabbath at all anymore. If you do have Protestants keeping the Sabbath, they do it on the wrong day of the week. You know, on those tablets of stone, it explicitly said the 7th day. Okay, not the first day of the week. So however you reckon your count of 7, the Sabbath has to always be on the 7th day. Okay, and I know there's debate on, do we really know if the 7th day is really the 7th day because, you know, maybe we lost count over the years? You know, there's a logical question to ask. But in any case, it's the 7th day, not the first day. Okay? Catholics, you know, yeah, if they open up their Bibles and read it, the commandment about idolatry will be there, what most people consider the second commandment. However, when you look at their list of 10 commandments that they break out of the Bible, that they put on posters and they put on the wall and stuff, that commandment's gone. And instead, they break up what most people consider the last commandment, or the 10th commandment, the one about coveting. They break it up into 2 parts to round out the 10. Okay? So this is interesting. So here's something I'm going to propose. Okay? Let's put this to bed and just figure out what is the 10 Commandments. Okay, first off, if you look at what's considered the Decalogue, okay, what we consider the 10 Commandments, like in Exodus 20, okay, if you actually go through and count the do's and don'ts, the you shall and you shall not, there are technically 12 commandments in that section. Okay, so right away, our number of 10 is off if we're going to be literal. Okay? The other thing is, when you see that phrase 10 commandments in your Bible, and you go to look at that word commandments in the Hebrew, it's actually words. It's not the word for commandments. Although obviously if you're going to command somebody to do something, you use your words to do it, right? But there's a distinction. It's the 10 words. Okay? Now, 10 commandments, you know, if there were actually 10 commandments and not 12, 10 commandments would make sense. 10 words is interesting. And here's my theory on what the real 10 commandments are. Okay? 10 words. When you look at the book of Deuteronomy, in the Hebrew Bible, the Jews call it debarim, words. Okay? And so, because that's what it is, you know. Debar is the singular, and debarim is the plural. Okay, so, you know, the 10 words is from that Hebrew word debar, word. All right? So, if I say, hey, so-and-so, can I have a word with you? Now, what's the expectation? Is the expectation that you're going to come over and say, okay, James, what are you going to talk about? And I'm just going to say, cat. Right? Because what did I say? Can I have a word with you? So there's a word. Is that what I really mean? No. I mean a conversation. Can I have a discussion with you? Can I have a conversation with you? Can I have a dialogue with you? And that word debar from debarim actually it's the same root word from the name Deborah. Okay, in our Bible. You know, like the prophetess, the judge. Deborah, which means bee. So it has this idea of communication, because what do bees do? They're famous for how they communicate with each other in the hive, right? So it's this idea of dialogue, really. You know, so the 10 words really, if we look at it deeper, has more to do with dialogue and discussion than it does commandments. Okay? So here's what I think the 10 words really are, the 10 commandments really are. If you go through the book of Exodus and you look carefully, you see that Moses actually went up and down the mountain 10 times. Now, most of us only think twice. When he goes up the first time to get the tablets, and he breaks them, and then he goes up the second time to get the tablets. Okay? He actually goes up 10 times. And each time he goes up, presumably he's having a conversation with the Almighty. Okay, do you see where I'm going here? I think that the 10 Commandments, the 10 words, really should be the complete record of those discussions. All 10 of those conversations documented. And you might say, well, James, whoa. Okay, buddy. So he goes up, right, the first time he's up for 40 days. And then Charlton Heston comes down the mountain. He sees the children of Israel have risen up to play. And he's, smashes the tablets, right? Well, at that point, James, he hasn't gone up to the mountain 10 times yet, has he? No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. So James, on those tablets, how can he have a record of all the discussions from the mountaintop, all 10 visits, if he hasn't had all 10 visits yet? Here's the answer, I think, and this is speculation, but I think the answer is because the Father exists outside the time domain. Okay? Right? He doesn't live in the past. He doesn't live in the present. He doesn't live in the future. Time is nothing to him. He knew what was going to happen. He knew that Moses was going to end up coming up, 10 times by the whole, he knows this stuff before it even happens. So, and there's no indication either that when Yahweh made the 10 Commandments, because remember, the first time, he cut the stones himself, and he wrote them with his own finger. There's no indication that Moses was like, ooh, let me read this before I go down. There's no indication that he did. Now, I think that would have blown Moses' mind, if my theory is correct. If those tablets had a record of all 10 conversations between the Father and Moses, that would have blown Moses' mind, because he would literally be reading the future, right? But he comes down and he smashes them, and then he has to go back up a second time and do a redo, right? And the other thing is when we look at the commandments, okay, it's clear when you read the text, there were commandments given, and then he goes down the first time, smashes the tablets. When he goes back up, there are commandments given that were not given the first time. There's new commandments given on his second visit up for the second set of tablets. All right? So it's like, well, James, how does he have all this written on the tablets twice? Again, I think it's a way of saying, hey, I'm the Father, I know the future, I know the end from the beginning. Here's a record of everything we're going to discuss on the mountain in stone, before it even happens. Now, if that's true, and again, this is speculation, but if that's true, then the naysayers who say, well, we don't have to keep the whole law, we only have to keep the moral commandments, the 10 commandments. And by the moral commandments, we mean not the Sabbath, and we don't mean idolatry either, if we're Catholic. Those are not moral issues, right? Those are like ceremonial or whatever. So we only have to keep the moral ones. Well, if I'm right in my theory, then all the commandments given at Mount Sinai would be counted in the 10 words, or the 10 discussions, or the 10 conversations. And if this is the case, then we're looking at something way bigger than just, a list of 10 thou shalls. Right? And especially when you get into the idea, and even the Jews believe this in some cases, there is indication in the text that when we look at it in the Hebrew, that the tablets of stone that he wrote on, like in our movies and stuff, they look like they're made out of concrete, or they look like they're made out of slate. Okay? There's a possibility that these things might have been actually made out of sapphire or lapis lazuli, like gems, crystals. Okay? One of the theories is if you're going to get that level of information, and this is kind of weird, but if you're going to get that amount of information on these tablets that Moses can carry, since they're crystal, you can store information in a crystal. Right? And of course that begs the question, well then how are they going to read it, James? I have no idea. That's a theory. Either way, I do think it is highly possible, and maybe even likely, that everything that was spoken on Mount Sinai was on those tablets both times. I think that that's a high likelihood. Because, you know, to only have the Ten Commandments, all right? The Ten Commandments were supposed to be the covenant between Yahweh and his people. And so, if you look at the Ten Commandments, most of them are just basic, hey, don't be a jerk kind of stuff. That even the pagans do. You know, like, you can go out and you can talk to a legit Satanist. All right? I know this because I've known them before. I went to school with a Satanist. He claimed to go to the Church of Satan. He asked me to teach him Metallica songs when I was in high school. All right? You know? And like, nice guy. You know? He wasn't like some evil, sinister guy like in the movies or whatever. Nice guy. You know? I worked with a practicing witch once. One of the most helpful coworkers I've ever had. Sweet lady. Weird as all get out. But kind. Compassionate, all of these things, right? So if we're just looking at the Ten Commandments as what we see, you know, on the church wall, right? Okay, so the ones that relate to humans, you know, it's, you know, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, right? Don't covet, don't bear false witness, you know, and we that's just basic, be a good person kind of stuff, right? And, of course, in today's day and age, the adultery, that's more allowed, you know, because, you know, just be yourself and have fun, right? That's the world, though. Now, the first four, the ones that have to do with how we love Yahweh, well, you know, we can just worship him however we want, right? Because he knows our hearts, right? Yeah, Jeroboam's right there like, yeah, there you go, that's the way. Worship him how you want. He knows your heart, says Jeroboam. But the idea is that I think if we're going to be honest about what the Ten Commandments actually are, I think it was most likely the written conversations between Moses and Yahweh all 10 times he went up. And that just blows my mind, you know? If we ever get access to the legit Ark of the Covenant, and, you know, somebody pulls it out and it's only like the Decalogue, I'm going to be a little skeptical. All right? Especially if that's pulled out of a golden ark. And I've done a thing on this before. I believe there were two arks of the covenant. I believe there was the gold one kept in the tabernacle and temple, and I believe there was a wooden one kept in the tent of Moses. I believe that the golden one is the one that Moses placed the broken tablets in, because he was instructed to put that first set of tablets in the golden ark once they made it. Yahweh never told him not to do that once he broke those tablets. So then, the second time when he goes up to get the second batch of tablets, Yahweh tells him, hey, make this ark of acacia wood and bring it with you. And then you're going to put the tablets of stone in that one. And this makes total sense. Because, you know, when Aaron's rod buds, when you have the jar of manna, okay, that goes in the ark. The idea is that the people are supposed to see it. It's supposed to bear witness to them. If that's in the golden ark, which only the high priest can see, and only once a year, and there's no indication that he's even allowed to open it, how does that work? You know, when they write the book of the law, and they place it beside the ark, you know, like as a witness, basically, you know, if you're going to make copies of the Torah, you need access to the original source document. If that's in the golden ark, which is in the Holy of Holies, ain't no scribe getting in there to make copies. So to me, the only way the text is reconciled is if you have a wooden ark with that stuff that's in Moses' tent. This would also explain why, when they brought the golden ark into Solomon's temple, Aaron's rod and the manna were not in there. That's because they never were in there. They were in the wooden ark in Moses' tent. But that's a whole other thing. So my point with all this is if we're going to be real about the Ten Commandments, I think we need to open and expand our minds to the idea that everything, all those conversations, could be the 10 Commandments, or more accurately, the 10 words. And if we're going to say, oh yeah, my church keeps the 10 Commandments, do you really? Most of us out here in the Hebrew roots Messianic thing don't even keep all the 10 Commandments, if we're looking at it that way, because a lot of us like to wiggle out of the ones that are inconvenient to us. you know? And, you know, we equivocate on things. Well, that, you know? And some of those commandments are commands. Some of them are statutes. Some of them are what's called laws. Some of them are what's called ordinances. Okay? So like Christianity likes to define the law as moral, ceremonial, and civic. But Yahweh's Word defines it as laws, commandments, statutes, and ordinances. They're all different types of commandments for different reasons and in different applications. But they're all part of that Sinaitic covenant. Now, the statutes and ordinances, a lot of those came after Mount Sinai. You know, if we're looking at the words that were said between Moses and Yahweh on the Mount, those commandments probably weren't on the stones. You know, at least based on my interpretation currently. You know, maybe they were. Maybe Yahweh put them on the stones knowing that he was going to issue them ahead of time. I don't know. But my gut tells me that when we find the real tablets, it's going to have all of those commandments, not just the Big Ten, not just the Decalogue. Because if you think about it logically too, when you read Acts 20, right? Yahweh starts, he gives them those 10 commandments, and then the people stop and they're like, whoa, 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 let's put the brakes on this before he kills us. Moses, you talk to him. It's implied, if you slow down and read it, that if the people would not have objected, Yahweh would have just kept right on going. You know? He would have just kept right on going with the rest of the commandments. But because the people objected, we go full stop, and then Moses goes up and gets the rest. Does that make sense? This is why I think that all of those commandments were on those tablets. Because Yahweh's whole intent was always going to be to give them all of those commandments, not just that first batch of 10 on the stones. Does that make sense? So, I don't know. I felt like I had to get this out here before I go to bed. Maybe this is useful to somebody. Yeah, logic tells me this could have waited because it's kind of like a small video. I don't even have a Bible open or whatever, but I felt like I had to jump in and do it. So maybe there's a reason for that. Anyway, I'm going to go to bed now for real. I love you guys. Thanks for tuning in now or later. And as always, Yahweh bless.